Now, to matters elsewhere, because one of our local councillors has just returned to Derry after his experience on board the MV Saoirse, an Irish-owned ship that set out last month in a bid to break the blockade of Gaza. When it was in port in Turkey, they discovered damage to the ship's propeller. They claim it was sabotage. Gerry MacLochlainn joins me. Good afternoon to you, Gerry.
Good afternoon, Mark.
And just outline for maybe listeners who are hearing this for the first time, Gerry, your reason for being in the flotilla.
Yeah. Well, as people in Derry may have known, I've travelled out to Gaza a couple of times now. I travelled out immediately after the cast-led Israeli invasion of Gaza and saw the aftermath of that invasion, the number of people killed, the wounded and so on. I was appalled to find out that the restrictions on material and aid coming into Gaza, and so I determined to do what I could to help alleviate that. I've travelled out with aid convoys on a number of occasions, and I'll be travelling out again with aid we're bringing from Derry out.
So you got the boat as far as Turkey, and what, woke up one morning, no propeller, what?
No. Well, we had the boat in Turkey where we were waiting for clearance for everyone, all the boats to go together, because there was over 20 different countries involved in this freedom flotilla. And we decided we were going to leave to challenge it. We took the boat out for a test spin just to see everything was working again after being laid up for a few days. And it was when we were doing that we discovered there was our engineer, who happens to also be a Sinn Féin councillor from Waterford. He noticed that there was a problem with the propeller. We got divers down to look at it. They examined it. It was obvious that the propeller shaft was bent. He took a closer examination and we discovered that the cause of it was a wedge-shaped cut that had been made into the propeller shaft, which weakened the shaft. We took it out of the water into dry dock, photographed it, documented, had people to examine it, and it is it is certainly man-made. It is certainly an act of sabotage.
Couldn't that kind of damage have happened to that kind of stuff happens to boats all the time, Gerry?
Well, we've got the photographs of them. People are welcome to look at them, and they're on the internet. But this is an absolutely perfectly machine cut, which is in there. It's not an accidental damage. It's not a bump. But not only that, one of our other boats, which is based in Greece, had the identical damage done to it, and the photographs are available both to be compared.
Just your boat in the flotilla? Any other boats in that particular flotilla affected like that?
In the whole flotilla, our boat and the other boat that was in Greece. The boats were in different places in order to leave. They were going to meet up in the middle of the Mediterranean to head for Gaza. And the other boat had an identical cut in both its propeller shafts. There was only one propeller shaft done in ours.
I'm not in any way making light of your intentions, but it's like something out of James Bond, maybe, if you're right.
Well, what I can tell you is that the damage that was done to ours was definitely man-made. I can say that absolutely without fear of contradiction. That will be demonstrated in the investigation taking place. But yes, it is a bit like something out of James Bond. We have a state which has obviously decided it's going to prevent people travelling to Gaza with humanitarian aid, and it's prepared to use...
To be clear, you're blaming Israel.
Oh, well, I don't think anybody else would do it. Israel did say they would stop us. They said they would stop us getting there. Last year, they intervened in a way that led to the deaths of 9 people. That was one of the reasons I decided I was going to go on the flotilla, because you can't tolerate that type of intimidation and murder of people who are going about humanitarian aid work. So I knew the risks that were involved. I went on that. I was absolutely committed to a peaceful delivery of aid, medical aid, and people to Gaza. We wished no harm to anybody, including the Israeli Defence Forces, who may or may not have intervened to stop us going there. And we found that damage was done to our boat that was designed to actually create the catastrophic damage when it was at sea. Had this happened we were at sea, we would have sunk and many of us would have been killed.
Well, listening to your concerns today from the Israeli embassy in London is Amir Ofek. Mr. Ofek, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Would you respond firstly, Amir, to these allegations being made by Councillor MacLochlainn that he senses his boat and other boats in flotillas seeking to help people in Gaza are being sabotaged by the Israeli state?
Well, I think that you yourself made it quite clear that first it's an old boat, sounds like a James Bond movie, and this is what he senses. I can just quote a Turkish diplomat that just this Friday said to a Turkish newspaper that according to initial finding by Turkish authorities that investigated the matter, the breakdown of the ship might not be a result of a sabotage. So what he sends, I think that should not be good enough in order to go as far as deciding who was behind. But I think that was a sabotage. So this is one thing. It's not as if he saw a little graffiti of Star of David around the bottom of the ship. This is just what he sends on an old boat that the Turkish authorities do not even think that it was a sabotage. So I think that they went a bit too far, as you said, James Bond movie.
You're not saying, Amir, that the Israeli state previously wouldn't have seen its perspective and right to go outside, for example, its own definition of its own sea and its own waters to, for example, interfere in other such flotilla?
I think that since we know that there are few attempts of smuggling weapons into the Gaza Strip, weapons that find its way at the end of the day to land on the head of Israel's civilians in the south of Israel. So Israel has the both moral and legal right, as was quite clear made in a statement by Prime Minister Cameron, that claimed that Israel has the right to check everything that enters Gaza in order to make sure that it would not leave Gaza in missiles. So if, by the way, our goals are not that different from the so-called activists on this flotilla, because on a daily basis, hundreds and thousands of tons weekly. This week, just 30,000 tons of goods enter Gaza. The only thing that those guys on the flotilla want is that it's not going to be supervised like in any other port around the world.
Just before I let Councillor MacLochlainn come back in, just to be clear, Amir Ofek, are you saying that the Israeli state had nothing to do with what he describes as the machined sabotage of boats?
Again, his decision, his feeling is a gut feeling. This is some kind of often ongoing baseless accusations. Israel was accused to be responsible for sharks attacks in Egypt and the Red Sea. So it seems some kind of a La La Land fantasy. I don't know how many more other accusations. Our point is very clear. We have the moral and the legal right to check that in 2,000 boxes of pasta entering Gaza, box number 122 would not contain anti-tank missiles that would end shooting on a yellow school bus in Israel. This is our moral right, and we don't need any other provocations, political provocations, such as this flotilla entering the region that is stressed enough.
Gerry MacLochlainn, you're imagining it.
Well, I mean, we've just heard a series of absurd claims from this person. This is the same government, of course, that denied at first that it had forged and stolen Irish passports and used them to murder a political opponent. We have a situation here where this government is unprepared to obey international law. Their siege of Gaza is illegal and immoral. There is no legal right to punish a There is no legal. I listen to this person making allegations against me, and I demand the right to speak. This is not Israel. Yes,
Mr. Ofek, can I stop you both? With respect, Mr. Ofek, I'd like to hear what both you and Councillor MacLochlainn have to say. Gerry, can you continue?
Yes, I've listened to what he had to say. He doesn't have the courtesy to listen to me, just as his government wasn't prepared to allow me to travel to Gaza.
Make the point.
The fact is, this was a machine-tooled cut. The engineers, the maritime engineers who lifted the boat out of the water for us, made it clear that it was clearly sabotaged, clearly man-made. This is not a fantasy. This is not about sharks. And there is no suggestion that anyone, or at least I hope he's not trying to make a suggestion that anyone in any of our boats was carrying anything untoward. We offered the United Nations, and we offered all, including the customs at Turkey before we left, to search our boat before it left. We invited journalists on our boats who were also able to search the boat. We have nothing to hide about what was there. However, despite that, Israel said they would stop us getting to Gaza and they would use whatever means required to stop us getting there. We're now beginning to see what those means included.
Amir, do you accept that your government and your state is seen by many in the world to be less than the charitable state that you describe? You're saying that you're letting all sorts of stuff into Gaza. Don't you recognise huge global concern away from what Hamas are doing in Gaza in terms of what people like Gerry MacLochlainn are trying to do for ordinary local people in Gaza?
Actually, on the contrary, I think that it's not just Israeli leaders who disapprove of this flotilla. World leaders from Ban Ki-moon, Hillary Clinton have publicly discouraged people from joining the flotilla. The Greek government offered the people on the flotilla to send the goods to Gaza through land. Israel has offered many times to get the goods and send it into Gaza through the Israeli side or the Egyptian side. So there is no base of the claim that goods are not entering Gaza. As I mentioned before, 30,000 tons just entered this week. The only thing that they want to do is that those goods would enter Gaza without the right of supervising it with Israel. And again, we have a very unfortunate experience with boxes that contain different things that the label on the box said. So in order for us to make sure that the pasta box contained pasta, we want to open it to check. If it's pasta, by all means, it would enter to Gaza, as so many other boxes doing on a daily basis.
Gerry, it's a reasonable security measure, isn't it, to examine what's coming in the state? A lot of people in the world would, I mean, they might disagree or agree with it, would like to see the Gaza people maybe having arms, all the rest. Maybe a lot of people see it in a militaristic perspective. Reasonable for Israel to defend itself and to inspect what goes in and out.
Well, that's not what the United Nations say, because this is not about defence. this is a blockade, or a collective punishment against the population of Gaza because Israel doesn't like how they voted. That's what's going on there. Now, the fact is that they say they will allow certain materials in. We have no objection to a proper inspection of materials in and out of Gaza, the same as any other country in the world. But no other country in the world has an invading army come and inspect its ports and demand the right to say what goes in and what doesn't go in. And that's what Israel's demanding. I was there weeks after the Israeli military. Talk about bringing weapons into Gaza. They brought tanks, they brought missiles, they brought white phosphorus, and they dropped that on people and killed over 600 children in 3 weeks. They killed 1,400 people in all. So the people who are raining weapons down on the people of Gaza are the people who are demanding the right to stop materials in. And very importantly, they're very limited what they allow in, even by their own standards. They're not allowing any cement in there. So the buildings that they destroyed, in the hospitals, schools and houses, they destroyed in Operation Castlehead have not been rebuilt because they won't allow the material in to rebuild it.
Serious allegations there, Amir Ofek. Do you deny any of that?
Well, I think that after 8 years and tens of thousands of missiles landing on our civilian population of the south, this is a little bit of daring to say that Israel, suddenly the whole situation started with the Israeli invasion into Gaza. I mean, any government, he said, no other country in the world, but no other country in the world in the recent years got tens of thousands of missiles on its population. We have kids who are 8 years old in southwest Israel, in Sderot, that never ever lived in any other situation and reality in which they had not to look for the next 15 seconds run distance shelter from the missiles that are coming from Gaza. And then we haven't seen any flotilla coming from with those activists to defend the right of the Israeli children to live in peace and security. So for 8 years, you had enough time to have tens of flotillas. None came. The moment Israel decided that enough is enough, and no kid in Israel should live in the south in the fear of 15 seconds time between the alarm comes over until the missile is exploded, then we decided that we're going in. So then suddenly the conscience of the people on this flotilla awaked. So this is absolutely ridiculous. This is not a moral stand. This is hypocrisy.
Gerry, in fairness, I mean, there are victims on both sides. Many would say disproportionate numbers. I mean, I'm sure you would acknowledge that children and families in parts of Israel have been disastrously affected. I mean, where is the humanitarian aid? If indeed what you're about is humanitarian aid, where is the flotilla to those communities? Where is the flotilla this week to the Horn of Africa? In a sense, some would observe these flotillas specifically to Gaza as being a two fingers to the Israeli state.
Well, it's not a two fingers to anybody.
Politically motivated.
No, I understand what you're saying. It's not a two fingers to anybody. I've taken part in campaigns to raise money and aid to other countries. So one of the people on the flotilla with me from Derry, Charlie McMenamin, has built 2 orphanages in Romania before this. So we're not being hypocritical. This is the most urgent one at the moment. Now, we heard a lot of emotional talk about people, and there are victims on both sides, and I'm against the violence being used on any side, by any side.
Against the Hamas?
I'm against all violence being used there. I think
specifically against the Hamas?
I'm against all people engaged in violence. And the thing is, I'm not going to engage in selective.
But to be clear, Gerry, does that include Hamas? What
yes,
Hamas
we have made it absolutely clear we're against violence. We don't want to see that happening. That's not the way to solve it. We want to see a peace process and a peaceful solution. But I held a 10-year. When I was there just after Operation Castlehead, I held a 10-year-old boy in my arms in hospital who was semi-comatose, who was suffering from severe injuries that could only be treated if he was allowed out of Gaza to hospital. I was 300 meters from the Israeli border at that time. He was not allowed out of the hospital to go to Israel. He was not allowed out of the hospital to go through Rafah to Egypt, by the Israelis preventing him from getting a permit to go there. Within weeks, that young boy was dead. And when I next was there, the doctor came and told me the boy had died. So I know about the emotion of young children being killed by terrorist action.
Amir Ofek, finally, I mean, the global headlines last year, the Israeli raid on a similar flotilla that Gerry's recently been on, killing 9 activists. It was a Turkish vessel. Each side blamed the other at that stage. Gerry has said he will be only too willing to allow the Israeli state to examine his or anybody else's boat. In terms of...
Just to clarify one thing. No, I didn't say that because we don't think the Israeli state have the right to do that. But we've invited the United Nations, the governments whose land we're in, or even international figures. But we're not accepting Israel's right to prevent the Palestinian people being able to import and export as any other country in the world should be allowed.
Just a point then to you, Amir Ofek, finally. This toughness of your government and the position that you've described, why must you keep that up so continually? I mean, do you believe that you live in threat every day of your lives? Or, I mean, why, when people seem to be so concerned about ordinary people in places like Gaza, can't you seem to work with people like Gerry MacLochlainn?
I'll tell you, because Gerry, as he himself said, he came to Gaza after the operation. I mean, in the 8 years before the operation, he never visited Sderot. So this is why his understanding and his information is very, very limited. So he held a Palestinian kid in his arm, which is obviously a tragic situation. And this is why we have to put an end to this situation. But just in last week, 300 patients from Gaza entered Israel to hospitals in Israel. For a long time, Hamas was the one that were not allowing people to leave Gaza into Israel, because it was some kind of a normalization that they object. And the border of Egypt, obviously Israel has no control over the border in Egypt. If somebody couldn't leave to Egypt, so maybe it's another hint that more than just Israel has some kind of an issue with the Hamas nature.
Some of our callers, though, Amir, saying it's totally unacceptable. We could have lost 2 local men on this boat. They're trying to cover up what happened. Another caller says you had no right to stop a flotilla. They're just delivering aid.
Which is not the case, because if it's just aid, so they could have delivered it from the Egyptian side, or as the Greek government offered them, they would help to deliver it, or as any other international organization that want to really help the people of Gaza and not to create some kind of a political provocation, would do it through the Israeli border or through the other side. But since all of those options are open and for them to use, and they refuse to use any one of them, this is why it brought Ban Ki-moon to condemn it. This is what brought Hillary Clinton to say that it's unacceptable. This is what brought the Greek government to offer them. The fact that they rejected it and that they chose the provocation of a very unstable region, this is, I think, action speaks louder than words, and this is pure provocation rather than a real attempt to help anybody in Gaza.
Amir, thank you for joining us today. Gerry, in a word, provocation, go through Egypt. Save yourselves the bother.
No, let's be clear about this. He knows this as well as I do. If you were to try and give all the material in and out of Derry that's required for our economy right down one road, it wouldn't work. We use a port here, we use an airport here, we have a railway line here, and we have several roads. You cannot have an economy based on one road, which is heavily policed and controlled.
Yes, but the question I asked you was,
the rapid crossing is a pedestrian crossing. It's not an aid crossing. So it's not a material crossing. So there's a lot of misinformation being given here deliberately. The fact of the matter is, the only way the people of Gaza will be able to stand on their own 2 feet is when their ports are able to be open, the same as Lisahali, the same as any other. And Lisahali has got customs people on there who inspect boats going in and out of it. There are all sorts of proposals can be made to make sure that things are inspected.
We have seriously overrun here. In a word, I must give you the final word, Amir. Gerry had the first word with respect. Let the people open their ports, Amir. Let the state function as a functioning state. Let them look after what comes in and what doesn't come in.
Well, it would be very easy to do in case that Hamas was not the controller of Gaza, and Hamas, as we all know, is recognized not just by Israel as a terrorist organization. So when the government is by this nature, obviously it makes it much more complicated to trust them to supervise what enters Gaza. For example, you can check what's going on the West Bank, in which you would have an annual growth of 12+%, because there you have someone that you can trust, and then there is no need of Israeli interference, and there is no need for the Israel to do something that would not be done otherwise by the local. So as long as we can trust, and it's not us, it's just the international community can trust the local to supervise and to make sure that nothing enters which is not supposed to be in the box, that's fine. The moment it comes to the Hamas trust, so obviously this is a completely different issue. We would be very happy to remove this blockade the moment that we can trust someone seriously to supervise what entering, to make sure that it would not leave Gaza through the air on the head of our civilians in the south.
We must, gentlemen, both of you.
So the punishment will stop the minute the people of Gaza vote for a government that Israel accepts. That's when the collective punishment will stop. I understand this now.
We must leave it there. Amir Ofek from the Israeli Embassy in London and Councillor Gerry MacLochlainn locally. Thank you both. That's a question we'll return to, no doubt, in 2,000 years' time, the way it has been for the last 2,000, it seems. 71266 522, that's the number of this programme.